Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Sammy Roth.
And I'm Rosie Murphy, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
We are watching Season 5, Episode 7, The Life and Death of Jeremy Bentham. This is a supersized episode, to use the old-fashioned network TV term.
We've also got the second half of our conversation with Jeff Fahey, who, of course, played Frank Lapidus. Actually doesn't appear in this episode, but is referred to a couple times as the pilot, so...
Yeah, so we'll be finishing that up, and let's get right into it.
We received a couple more hot takes from you all between last week and this week. Thank you so much. Here's one about some funny lines we didn't discuss from 316.
Hi, Sammy. Hi, Rosie. I'm a huge fan of the episode 316 from Season 5. The best part of this episode, in my opinion, are some of the best quotes I've ever seen in a episode of Lost. You have one of my favorite things is Ben Linus on the plane talking with Jack, and Ben's reading his book when he knows everyone's going to crash and all these other people are going to be displaced from their families. And Jack asks Ben, how can you read? And without skipping a beat, Ben just says, my mother taught me. Which, something as small as this is just a pure lie, as we know that Ben's mother did pass away when giving birth to Ben. So something like that, it cracked me up to no end. And then you also have Frank Lapidus saying, we're not going to Guam, are we? What a great episode, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, I really like the insight here that as funny as Ben's line is, that of course it's Ben, so it's also just totally false. I think that's good writing for Ben to give him a joke that just is also a great lie. Mm-hmm. We got one more listener hot take here, a question having to do with some of the events of this part of the season.
Hey, Sammy. Hey, Rosie. This is Matt. Love the podcast, guys. So I don't necessarily have a hot take. It's more of a question, but I have seen Lost through and through several times now, and I, for the life of me, cannot figure out or understand how in the hell certain people wound up back in 1977 or whatever it is, and then how Sun, Ben, and Lapidus remain in the current timeline. I have not been able to figure that out. I haven't Googled it or anything, but on the surface of watching it, nothing clicks to me. I feel like I'm missing something painfully obvious. If you guys have any insight on what I may or may not be missing, please do enlighten me. And again, love the show. Keep up the great work. Look forward to listening to more of your episodes. Take care.
Matt, I don't know that there's a great answer here. I don't certainly have the solution to this one. I think that the probably most straightforward explanation is that this is how it was always supposed to happen. I mean, we see the photos in the barracks later. Jack and Kate and Hurley were always members of the Dharma Initiative, which was apparently how the island wanted it. And so that's how it happened. That's what I would say. I don't think you're missing anything. Thank you guys for sending in those hot takes. If you're listening and you want to send in your own hot take for us to play on the show, give us a ring. We're at 9546-DHARMA, and leave us a message, preferably 60 seconds or less.
All right. Well, we have a lot to cover this week. Sammy, what's your hot take on the life and death of Jeremy Bentham?
So before we recorded, I sent Rosie a text predicting that we were going to once again have the same hot take this week, and so let's see if that turns out to be correct.
I can't wait to find out what it is.
My hot take is, Sayid is a saint. Yeah? Yeah, you're raising your arms. Your hot take?
That wasn't set aside as my hot take, but I agree 1,000%. Sayid nails it in this conversation,
For 2 years, I was manipulated into thinking I was protecting everyone on the island.
Who was manipulating you?
Ben. So who is manipulating you, John?
This is coming from me, nobody else.
Great question. Great question,
Indeed.
Sayid. And, he just tells it to him straight. And
not only that, what impresses me the most is after everything this dude has been through, the fact that he lost Nadia and couldn't find her and crashed on the island and finally got back to her only for her to be killed tragically. The fact that he has the perspective to be at peace saying, those were the best 9 months of my life. That's what I know in my heart.
Yeah.
And the fact that he really feels that and is comfortable with it, and that he then went and worked for Ben and did murders for him for 2 years, and now he's building houses for charity in the Dominican Republic and just seems like so at ease with everything that's happened to him and so at peace. I mean, it's just, I don't know how a human being is capable of that, how these events didn't just wreck this guy. He's beautiful. He's just so beautiful.
I don't know that I agree that he seems at peace. I mean, I think he's probably doing this as kind of a, I have nothing left and I guess I'd better go do some good in the world, you know, because of all of the stuff I did for Ben, like all the bad stuff I've done. I mean, we know that Sayid is kind of constantly trying to make up for things he feels guilty about in his past. I thought that was more what was happening here rather than him being like very zen about everything.
But think about what you just said, that this is a guy who has nothing left, and so he's decided he better do some good in the world. How many people would really have that attitude and really put that into practice?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just that he has nothing left. I mean, his life has been, you know, violently stolen from him by a variety of evil forces. Mm-hmm. I mean, he says to Locke at the end, I mean, he says, if you change your mind, you're welcome to come back here and do some real good.
Yeah.
I mean, he really believes that. I just don't know that I don't know that how many people would really have it in them at this point after everything to go and actually do good in the world and to be able to value the good that he had in his past and to say those were the best 9 months of my life rather than to just be bitter and torn apart by it. I don't know how he does it. That's my sense of it.
Yeah, he does seem to have kind of made extraordinary progress in these 3 years, which makes it even worse that he was kidnapped and forced to come back to the island.
Kidnapped and forced to come back to the island and drugged and tortured and consumed by monster sickness, ultimately. Before, after all of that, sacrificing his life to save his friends. What a fucking dude.
MVP. That's all there is to it.
MVP of life and of Lost. Anyway, yes, Sayid is my hot take. Rosie, what do you got?
That's a really good one. This is a little less, I probably won't do as much like gesticulating during this as I just did during that conversation. But, you know, we kind of mentioned this as an aside last week that in early plans for season 5, this episode was at one time slated to air before 316. I kind of think I would have preferred that. I think they're both obviously phenomenal episodes that are just jam-packed with revelation after revelation. But I think, you know, some of the questions I had after 316, feeling like I felt like I didn't quite get enough background as to what it was that made these people come to be here. I mean, of course, those questions get answered and they amplify a lot of the emotions from last week. I mean, we just talked about Sayid being forced to come aboard this plane. That's worse now that we know that he had sort of found some kind of peace. With Hurley, we don't really get any answers, but like where this slots in the timeline in Jack's life, for instance, we find out that it's just before he started, and he alludes to this way back, I think, in Through the Looking Glass, where he says, like, you know, I've been on weekends just flying across the Pacific, like whatever flight I can get in hopes that it'll crash. You know, this is where that starts. And like, it makes so many good connections. And I think the punch that 316 packs with Jack's conversion story, which we talked about last week, I think that's made more powerful by this. And I think I would have really felt it if I had had this first, particularly the Jack and John conversation where, you know, John ends up in his hospital and insists that it's fate. And Jack says, you know, absolutely not. And Jack is really like pretty mean to Locke here. I mean, he says he's having delusions. You're not important. You've never been important. And then, you know, and then he has this tremendous come to Jesus moment, for lack of a better term, where he reads the suicide note and wishes he'd believed him. And I don't know. I think I see why this was planned at one time to go that way. And I think it might have been cool.
That's interesting. I don't like, well, two things. One, you referred to Sayid being at peace, so clearly I convinced you before. Two, I don't know that I have a strong disagreement with that. I still like it how they did it. I don't know that I would have needed this in the way that you did necessarily, but that makes sense to me. I mean, I think that for me personally, I think that I got enough of, you know, seeing Jack refer to his interactions with Locke and talk about how they affected them going back to Through the Looking Glass, going back to There's No Place Like Home, that I don't know that I would have needed that scene to come first to have the full effect, but I see it, and I don't have a strong argument against what you said.
Yeah, and of course, we can't change whatever happened, right? I'm not saying that I think it was bad necessarily. It's interesting to think about how that might have felt.
One thing that I was thinking about in terms of the order that they showed stuff is that originally, as we discussed earlier in the year, that the way the season was originally envisioned was that the first scene of this episode, I think, was going to be the first scene of the season.
With Caesar in the office?
With Caesar in the office, and ultimately leading to the revelation of Locke on the beach, and that they ultimately changed that and went with Faraday down in the Orchid. Mm-hmm. And I know I said, I think in the pilot this year, that I liked it better this way, the way they did it, and I still think I like it better the way they did it. But it occurred to me watching this scene that it would have been, one, it would have opened just so many interesting questions, like why did another plane crash on the island, how did they get here, etc. So that would have been cool, but then I think especially it would have been cool to have the revelation of, oh shit, Locke is seemingly alive on the island, to be the scene immediately following the close of season 4, where the last moment is the revelation of Locke in the coffin. That would have been interesting. I think, again, I like it better the way they did it, but I can see why this would have been another way to do it. It would have made some sense.
Yeah.
So the life and death of Jeremy Bentham. This is an epic journey of an episode.
Yeah. All over the world, through time and space. I guess let's start at the top with Locke, arriving at the exit in Tunisia and being taken to that hospital, and Charles Widmore coming to visit?
Yeah, I think so.
So I guess my big question about this is, what is Widmore doing here? Is he manipulating? He's probably manipulating Locke, as Saeed suggests, but to what end? How, what do you think is going on with him here?
So I had two thoughts about that. One is that Widmore, when he comes back to the island later in season 6, says that Jacob came to him and showed him the error of his ways and, brought him back to help. I don't think that that's happened yet. I don't think that that's really the most logical explanation here, since, I don't know, Widmore is still I think that happens later. Widmore still seems like a jerk. I think what's more likely is that Ben, for all the crap that Ben does this week, I think that Ben is probably right when he says that Widmore, all he cares about is getting back to the island, and he sees the Oceanic 6 as a way back. It was pretty cool to hear Widmore ask Locke, that time when we met in the 1950s, how long ago was that for you? 4 days ago. That was kind of a woo, that's pretty cool. Yeah,
and Widmore's just sort of like, wow, fascinating. Which, fair enough, it must feel fascinating to be in that place.
We also get our first foreshadow here of the events of Dead is Dead, with Widmore referring to how Ben tricked him into being forced off the island, which is not something we've seen yet. I also thought Widmore's speech about there's a war coming, and if you're not back on the island when that happens, the wrong side is going to win. That was sort of an interesting preview of the end game here. We're kind of transitioning away from the Ben versus Widmore conflict into the the bigger conflict.
Right, particularly with the Man in Black arriving unbeknownst to us in this episode as John and taking his final form, I guess, kind of.
Yeah. I don't know that I have a good answer about Widmore, but I certainly think that it's most likely he's just up to his own ends here.
Yeah. I never really feel like I know what Charles Widmore's up to.
We get Widmore, and then we also get Matthew Abbadon back in the game, who has always been a character who, Lance Reddick is a great actor, and I just would have been fascinated to know more about this dude who, even though he's nominally working for Widmore, his whole speech about how, what he does is he gets people where they need to go, and knowing that he, sent Locke on his journey towards the island originally, this seems like a guy with his own agenda or his own, hidden boss that he's working. He reminds me of Miss Hawking in a way, kind of an independent player who's out there manipulating events, and we're not entirely sure why or how.
Yeah, or maybe even in that same category as Richard, somebody who is currently aligned with Widmore in this case, but Yeah, kind of doing his own thing, because I don't quite go all the way to it was Charles Widmore who initially wanted Locke to go on the walkabout. Like,
No.
that doesn't seem right. So yeah, Abbadon must have had some sort of grander purpose there. Do you think Ben really kills him? Like Ben himself, or do you think it was sort of a henchman?
That was it. I mean, of all of the sort of, like acts of violence that happen on the show and things that are surprising, I don't think there's another moment on Lost that's so like just brutally like stunning out of nowhere as seeing the blood spatter on the back of the windshield. Like it just so comes out of nowhere and it's so violent.
Yeah.
Like it was very unusual for Lost.
Well, yeah. I mean, I actually think Ben murdering Locke at the end of this episode, if we could just jump ahead for a moment, is more sudden and way scarier. I mean, it's dark. It seems like the last couple weeks are really underscoring, like, funny though he might be, he's pretty deeply evil. Yeah.
What makes me the most angry at him in that scene, I mean, not the most angry, I mean, he kills Locke. That's, I don't know how you can be angrier at him than for that, but clearly he went into their... Like, the moment Locke says the words Eloise Hawking, he gets this look in his eyes, and it's like he knows exactly what he has to do in this moment. Like, he was ready for that. He had put thought into, like, despite the whole speech he was making to Locke, you have work to do, you're important, you can't die. I mean, you suspect it's probably bullshit, but you know it's bullshit because he went into this thinking, the moment I get what I need out of Locke, and I know what I need to know to get back to the island without him, he is dead. I am eliminating my rival. That was Ben's plan all along, and he was ready to stop on the spot and execute it the moment he got what he needed. Ugh. Yeah. And you can see it earlier in the scene, if you know what's coming, like when Locke is telling him about, how he promised that he wouldn't bring Jin back, or Sun back, and that he made the promise to Jin and took the wedding ring. Like, Ben's response to this is a promise, which one, is bullshit because Ben's never going to live up to that. But it's like you can just sort of see the gears turning in his head as Locke says that stuff to him, and he's thinking like, okay, how am I going to use this to manipulate Sun into coming back? Like, it's like there's not even a gap in the moment the words are coming out of Locke's mouth and the gears are already turning in Ben's head about how he can use this for his own purposes. It's really, it's brutal. It's really brutal.
It's brutal.
Yeah. There's a lot more to say about that scene, I think, but should we back up and go through one by one here, maybe, with some of these meetings? Yeah.
Sure. So we already talked about Sayid.
Yeah.
And then the next person he goes to see is Walt, which is an interesting choice, both by John and by the writers. I do think it was something of a kindness for John to not tell him that Michael's freighter blew up. At least he says, oh, last I heard your dad was like, on a freighter near the island. And, he doesn't need to know how that ended. That was sad.
Yeah. I mean, he's going to have to find out at some point, but maybe it doesn't need to be right now.
Yeah. One other thing that's said in this scene, John says to Abbadon, I only need to convince one of them, which of course is Jack, and the rest will follow. That ends up not being true at all.
I had the same note. He's so wrong. He's so wrong.
And that it does end up being the case that Jack is the first to be convinced, but he is unable to bring the others along either. I mean, Kate he plants the seed for Kate, and she kind of gets there on her own. Sun is doing her own thing entirely. And Sayid and Hurley, Jacob has to come back to personally convince Hurley.
Yep.
John, a completely wrong call on John's part.
And Sayid has to get kidnapped, and Desmond doesn't come back at all, and Walt doesn't come back. No, he's so. I mean, this leads to a larger point here, and I feel bad saying this in an episode where Locke is so tragically sympathetic, and it's like I feel bad saying anything negative about Locke, but he really doesn't know what he's doing. He really does not have a good plan here. He basically, after not seeing these people for 3 years, he, pops up out of nowhere and, it's just immediately okay, you have to come back to the island with me. You do. And none of them are really feeling that. And it's like there's no attempt to, build up a rapport or ease into it or, try to figure out how they're doing in their lives. It's like, oh, good, you're here. You got to come back to the island with me now. And they just all keep calling bullshit on him, understandably so. And he finally, catches makes a smart move with Jack where he, points out the thing about it's fate that I ended up in your hospital, and he figures out that Christian was his dad. So he finally does, he makes two smart moves there. But with all of the rest of these conversations, like, what does he really think is going to happen?
I mean, that's the great part of the tragedy of John's life, right? Is that he is quite naive, despite, moments where he claims leadership or, believes he is meant for leadership and so plays the part of the leader. I mean, at heart, he doesn't know what he's doing, and he's sort of, his MO is like, let the lantern illuminate my next step, and then I'll take that next step, and then the lantern will show me the next step. And when you have people, when he's sort of going head to head with people like Ben and Widmore, who are like playing 10-dimensional chess, I mean, it's just, he's not on their level. He's not ruthless, and he's not willing to do the things that they're doing. And maybe that's a good thing. Like, we don't need any more ruthless killers in the world. But
I mean, I would go even a step further. And again, I feel awful, but I don't know that he's smart enough to keep up with them.
Yeah.
Like, and not only are Ben and Widmore playing 10-dimensional chess with him as one of the pawns, Jacob and the man in black are playing interdimensional chess with him as one of the pawns.
Well said.
Thank you. But you know what I mean? It's like, there's a part of me that, hearing Locke talk about how, no, I was wrong, I'm not important, when he, is on the verge of committing suicide at the end, and Ben is telling him, no, you have work to do, you've got to get back to the island. Like, in a very sad kind of way, Locke is sort of right. I mean, ultimately, you can argue about, is he important or not, and maybe he is, but he is a pawn. I mean, that's ultimately the purpose he serves, whether you believe, like our listener last week, that he, was being manipulated from the moment he got to the island, whether he was manipulated before that by Matthew Abbadon and whoever Matthew Abbadon might have been aligned with at that moment to send him in that direction. Mm-hmm. Certainly now that he's doing the Man in Black's bidding directly, whether it's part of Jacob's plan that he goes back so that the Man in Black can take his body and ultimately be killed by Jack and Kate at the end. Maybe that's, a risk that Jacob was willing to take to allow that to potentially happen. Like, whoever you want to ascribe it to, he's a pawn, and ultimately he never leads the others. He never leads the island. And he dies, but having, inadvertently done the bidding of others, thinking he was special. God, I feel so dark saying that, and I hope some of our listeners call and complain at me and tell me that I'm a bad person for that. But, I mean, that's kind of what I took from this episode.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're not wrong. Like, we've always known that Locke is naive, and we've always known that he is willing to let blind faith be his guide. And yeah, this is by far the biggest mission, most complex thing he's ever been asked to do or felt like he was asked to do. And he was explicitly asked. I mean, he's not just sort of operating entirely on a feeling here, but one of the things that really broke my heart was, in the scene where he writes his suicide note to Jack. I mean, what I feared he was thinking in that scene was, well, I tried, and Richard told me I was going to have to die, so I guess.
Oh yeah, I think that's completely what he was thinking.
Yeah, as if that too were him thinking he was fulfilling the plan, which is like, really, really sad.
I mean, I think that's why he wrote the note he did, because he was thinking this would be the only thing that would make Jack believe and go through with it, for him to kill himself and to send Jack into a tailspin. And ultimately, I mean, that's the one part of the plan that kind of works.
Yeah.
I mean, not that, that's really how his life ends, but that's what Jack thinks. And the suicide note kind of, as we discussed last week, it seems to serve its intended purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, what was even sadder, I mean, after he then makes that choice and thinks this is how I'm going to fulfill the plan and fulfill my destiny, like, once he gets up on the table to do it, you can tell he so badly doesn't want to do this. He's holding back tears. It wasn't like he was, trying to end his own life because, he thought he would be seeking happiness or fulfillment or, peace that way. It was, I think you're right. I think it was transactional to him. Yeah,
which is horrible. I mean, it's a testament on one hand to the depth of his belief in his mission. And he believes it so deeply that he is willing to die. Because he was told by Richard and by Christian that that's what he had to do. And he thinks that that is the island telling him, this is your destiny, John. And at one point, Abbadon says to him,
You say that like it's all inevitable.
Mr. Widmore told me Richard Alpert said that you were going to die. So you tell me, John, is that inevitable or is it a choice?
What, you think I want to die? How is that? How could you possibly think that's a choice?
Hey, I'm just a driver.
and I think that's a really good question. Like, Locke believes it's inevitable, and so it is, but he always had a choice, I think. I mean, we see Sayid got to say absolutely the heck not and get out of Ben's employ. You know, it's not like these men are
right. But then how did that end for Sayid?
Well, right. Ugh.
I mean, no, I
Maybe
mean,
it is,
this is
yeah.
I think this is a really, ripe area for discussion. What does it mean to have free will or choice in a world where there's such powerful forces, determined to manipulate events toward a predetermined or, desired end? I'm guessing that a bunch of our listeners, and I don't think you have, but I'm guessing a bunch of our listeners have probably watched the premiere of Loki, the new Marvel show, which I was actually thinking about while watching this episode of Lost. And the reason for that, without, too much spoiler for Loki, although if you really, don't want to hear anything, mute for a second here. But there's this idea in the premiere of something called the sacred timeline, and that anything that strays from the sacred timeline and the way that things are supposed to go is, problematic, and that the powerful forces charged with maintaining the timeline need to correct it and fix it and make sure that things stay on their path. And that phrase kept ringing through my head watching this episode, the sacred timeline. I mean, yes, maybe Locke could have made a different choice here, but he probably ends up dead a different way. Right. Yes, maybe he didn't follow Abaddon's advice to go on a walkabout, but who would have come to him next, or what would have, come to him next to push him in that direction? I mean, this is the speech that Miss Hawking makes to Desmond back in Flashes Before Your Eyes in season 3, that, the man in the red shoes was going to die no matter what, even if you had warned him there, about, whatever it was that was going to fall on him. It's uncomfortable and it's difficult. Yeah. And yes, so what do you have choice, even if you can make a different choice? If whatever happened, if the timeline is sort of set in stone and anything that deviates from it is going to be corrected, what does free choice, what does free will mean? What does choice mean? And what does it mean to believe in destiny and fate when even that, is potentially a predetermined outcome here? Like, Locke believes he's important because these forces have led him to believe he's important. Right. And so it's like, I want to admire him for the depth of his faith, but at the same time, it very much comes from a place that's not really a free choice he's made to believe in himself. I mean, he's been manipulated into believing that. Right.
They've played on his insecurities, and they've recognized that weakness and exploited it.
So true.
All the way to this end. And I do think John has a small moment of sort of personal growth or personal healing when he goes to visit Helen's grave. And he does say to Kate at one point, like,
it just didn't work out.
Why not, John?
I was angry. I was obsessed.
Look how far you've come.
Which is a real sharp burn, but a really good insight by Kate as well.
Not untrue. And then when they go to Helen's grave, Abaddon says, like, a version of what you just said, which is, you couldn't have stopped her. Her path led here. Like, she died, people die. And Locke says, maybe I could have stopped it. And I think the takeaway from that is like, no, probably not. But you could have had, like Sayid says, you could have had 9 good months or a few good years or, happiness.
But is that really all that we can expect out of life? I mean, I think it's meaningless without free will. I really do. I mean, that shouldn't be all that we're, able to expect. A few happy months or years here and there between the, between the fates that are coming for us anyway. That's not the way it should be. I don't want to live that life in that universe.
Ugh.
I mean, I had an especially creepy thought about Helen. Like, I don't disagree that maybe there's a little bit of moment of, growth and reflection for Locke there with that conversation with Kate. But my thinking watching this is, it's Helen's death and her burial in Santa Monica, California that leads to Locke getting into this car crash that winds him up in Jack's hospital, which Locke, says is a moment of fate, which is what leads Jack ultimately back to the island. Like, is that why Helen died? Because Locke needed to be in that place in that time to get into a car crash on the west side of Los Angeles and end up in Jack's hospital? Like, I almost feel like that would be subtext, but it's like right there for the reading.
I hadn't thought of that, actually. And I think this is the question about everything that happens in the universe ever, both within Lost and in the real world, right? Is like, is the butterfly effect real, right? Like, you change one small thing and you push over the line of dominoes and A leads to B, leads to C, which leads to D. Or does stuff just happen, and Helen just happened to die and Locke just happened to go to her grave, and that happened to be, presumably he would have found Jack another way if he hadn't ended up in that hospital, that is the mission he was on.
Yeah. But to me, the butterfly effect, and I like that you raised that, to me, the butterfly effect suggests that we do have free will, because it suggests that something as minor as a butterfly flapping its wings in a different direction can change the course of events in a significant way. And I think that Lost is suggesting the opposite of that. That it doesn't matter how many ways and how many directions the butterfly flaps its wings. Like, ultimately, things are going to course correct and get back to the same point.
Well, that kind of sucks.
I'm sorry. This is such a downer. I feel bad about it.
It's not a happy episode, man. It's
not. It's an incredibly well acted episode.
Oh my gosh, yes.
By Terry O'Quinn and Michael Emerson. And also, I thought Matthew Fox was phenomenal in the scene in the hospital as well. And usually I'm not such a big fan of his work, but I thought he was great there.
Yeah, he really brings us back to that moment where he's just starting to go off the rails a little bit. The beard is a good signifier of sort of where Jack is at. And it's grown in. He's been growing it for a little while. And, clearly John comes in when he's not in a good place. And he's already, presumably he's already sort of broken things off. He and Kate have separated. He's not doing awesome. And Locke happens to show up and happens to say the one thing that could really send Jack over the edge, which is, I've spoken to your father.
I was actually reminded as I was rereading Jack's Lostpedia page that it was Christian appeared to him in Something Nice Back Home, season 4, episode 10, which is where he broke things off with Kate. So I'm sure that's why especially this was a tipping over the edge point, because he had been seeing visions of his father and not wanting to believe that they were real.
Yeah.
And this is like, nope, they were real. Your dad's out there talking to people.
Yay.
We didn't really talk about the Hurley scene.
Yeah. I don't really know what to make of the Hurley scene. Hurley thinks John is an apparition at first and confirms that he is not. Yeah, then he says he sees Matthew Abbadon and he says, absolutely the fuck not. I don't trust that guy. He's evil, which may or may not be true. We don't really get to know, I don't think. But yeah, he at least has I think it's a good instinct to say, excuse me, you're working with that guy. I think it's the same instinct that motivates him to leap up on Flight 316 and say, excuse me, Ben's here.
Yeah.
I thought, I trust you people. I do not trust these people. And Hurley is a reasonably good judge of character, I think. He's usually pretty good at saying, that person, please, let's not trust them. And then John or Jack or somebody else is always like, no, I'm working with Ben. It's okay. And Hurley's like, no, it's not okay. Yeah. He's always right.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And that's a good point.
Okay. Well, that's been a lot. We have not talked about anything that happened on the island yet, which maybe we want to with Locke and Caesar and Alana and company.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. We should talk about new Locke, but also I find the Caesar-Alana interactions very interesting. Like, they're setting up some, leadership intrigue here over, Caesar hiding the rifle and Alana, being skeptical of him. It's like, maybe these aren't going to end up going to super satisfying places. But at the moment, it's like, ooh, I'm into this new group of people. Like, I want to know what's going on with them. I mean, I thought there were some good callbacks here to early on in the show. I thought that, the discussion of this mysterious gentleman, he wasn't on the plane, is a great Ethan Rom type of callback.
The insistence on getting a passenger manifest.
Yeah. The sort of slow reveal of the plane on the beach where they're walking and they just kind of like in the background, like they're walking past a giant airplane, kind of like Jack's arrival on the beach in the first moments of the pilot, where they kind of just casually pan out and you see in the background like the destructed plane. Like, I thought there were some fun callbacks. And also, just the fact that Locke is here, that there's a guy who was in a coffin on the plane who's, seemingly up walking around, like very Christian Shepherd-like.
Yeah.
Ultimately this guy's actually corporeal, which Christian wasn't, but similar. And he's wearing the guy's shoes too.
The other thing that I think would have been really fun had this episode aired prior to 316 is, they refer to like, oh, the pilot and a woman left in one of the outriggers. To then find out that the pilot of 316 was Frank Lapidus, I think would have been a really, really fun reveal. But that's
fair.
Okay.
That's fair. We've talked all about how, kind of like poor and sad and lonely Locke is this week, but the new Locke, who's actually the man in black, I think I've said this before, but in retrospect, it's so clear that Terry O'Quinn is playing a different character here. Like, this is just not the same dude. He has this quiet confidence, and he's at peace, and he's enjoying the most delicious mango. Like, you can chalk it up to Resurrection, but in retrospect, it's like, nah, Resurrection wouldn't have done this. This is a different individual.
If Locke had realized he had succeeded in getting back to the island after knowing he'd been killed, if he had sort of woken up on the island, I think he probably would have had a little bit of swagger too. Probably not this much. You're right. Probably not this much. I think there would have been a lot more wonderment.
But that's my feeling about it as well. That he definitely might have had some some excitement and some wonder, but I don't think it would have been quite like this, where it's just like, I know everything now.
It's kind of sneering.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's almost kind of, it's not mean, but it's very like superior, and yeah, it's got like a steely edge to it, which John very seldom has ever had.
Yeah, and I think not knowing what's really going on, like, it's easy to believe that this is the same guy and that the resurrection changed him. But I think that's one of the things that's so brilliant about what they've done here, that in the moment, the first time, you can buy it. But in retrospect, you look back and it makes so much more sense knowing what really happened.
Yeah, it does.
Which I think is a pretty cool effect.
I don't really have a lot else to say on this episode. I think that about covers it. It's a downer, but, still a really remarkable episode of television. But I do think it's time that we turn it over to Jeff Fahey. And
just as a reminder, we mentioned this last week. We recorded this interview with Jeff in two parts over 2 different days, which he references a couple of times. We also have at the end of this a little bit of a behind the scenes of the recording of our season 5 teaser, which you may have heard with Jeff reading some of his lines from the show modified to be about the hatch. There was just some interesting discussion that led to, so we figured we would play a bit of just the behind the scenes recording of the teaser at the end of this.
Yep, this is a really fun one. Let's play it.
I was asking you earlier about action sequences, and one that I didn't pick up there that I wanted to bring up. Right at the end of the show, you're in the submarine when that bomb goes off. That, I imagine you needed a stunt double for that one, because that door hits you pretty hard.
Oh, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, when we did that, that was Jack. Jack Bender was directing that one. And some stunt guy came in. And, as I said before, a lot of times years ago, I would enjoy doing my own stunts. I would never take a job away from the stuntman. We'd do a shot where I could do it and then he would do it. And, but on this one, I just said, yeah, it's cool. He can do it. And man, that door flew off. Thank God I didn't do it, because he took a hit. Yeah. I mean, he was safe. Everything was, because that's what those cats do. And they were prepared for it. But that door, if you remember, I mean, that came flying off. he went flying on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, what I was going to say about that was I remember watching that the first time and just assuming that your character was dead. Like I was shocked when your character is found, Frank's found floating in the water in the finale 2 episodes later, because I just thought that door hits him. Okay, that's the end of Frank Lapidus.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if I remember correctly, that you never knew. You had a contract. I mean, that was the last season, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I had a contract for a certain amount of episodes, but with those cats, I mean, you never knew if you were, you could leave that island at any time, whether you were contracted for a number of shows or not. I mean, obviously they would pay if you were contracted, but they always had the great flexibility, creative flexibility to move those characters in and out at will. And I think when I read it, I thought, okay, that's the end of me. And Jack talked to me and he said, well, we're not sure. So, and again, that was the last season. I was contracted for the whole season. So, I mean, financially, if I died, that's cool. I get paid for the episodes I don't die. I don't work on, rather. But I was glad. I really dug the fact that they gave me the heads up that the character was still going to be around. But yet you didn't know what the next script was going to be. I'm not sure if I came back right away or whenever.
No,
that was.
I think there were 2 episodes after that, at least one or maybe 2 that you weren't in, so it was kind of left open-ended for a bit. But I was just going to say, I mean, to me, going back and just kind of going methodically through, your scenes and the episodes that you were prominent in, I think my takeaway at this point is that your character needed to survive till the end because they needed a pilot. I mean,
I think they. I mean, I certainly can't speak for Carlton and Damon, but I think they were considering all options, and obviously that is the reason they kept the Frank character around. But I think I'm sure they were thinking of other endings, but they knew. I think I really honestly can't speak for these guys because I didn't get inside. Mm-hmm. Inside the writing room and inside the psyche. And I would imagine that they had a number of options that they were considering. But to that point, I do remember they did say, we've got to keep you around. So, which was wonderful. Again, I wish we were there. Really. It was a beautiful job. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Something I love to ask folks about is in Frank Lapidus's case specifically, there's an episode in season 6 where you're talking to, I believe it's Michael Emerson, and
I love Michael. Such a nice man and a brilliant, beautiful actor. Yeah.
Frank says, maybe how different would my life have been if I had been the pilot of Oceanic 815? And Ben says, well, the island still got you in the end, didn't it? And that's a really big theme of the show, right? This idea that fate brought all these people together and brought them all there. How did you think about that in your approach to Frank? I mean, what role does fate play here? What are these choices? What choices is he making, and what is sort of predestined or meant to be?
I think with Frank, and we touched on it yesterday, that in some ways his life was better on the island. It was less confusing. He was able to, at that point in time in his life, confront guilt from the past, and I think, it's kind of like, who was the young character, the young actor, and Tara Quinn's character asks him, "Why did you burn the boat?"
That's Walt. Yeah.
Oh, it's Walt.
Malcolm David.
And he says something to the effect that I was tired of moving around. I didn't want to leave, which obviously goes back to his own life of moving homes and changing all the time. And I remember when I saw that episode, and I kind of related a bit of that to Frank. which then again also was part of where Jeff, was at in my life, which was wonderful to be in Hawaii doing this wonderful gig, having been on the road for most of my life. So I think sometimes consciously or subconsciously we add parts of our own life to the character. But in answer to your question, I had liked the idea that it was all my own subtext. It wasn't written in, obviously, because it wasn't discussed. But in answer to your question, I think his life was easier and less confusing on the island, and he could blend in and almost be completely alive, but yet and still part of this great adventure, and not knowing what the future is, but being comfortable with it. And I hope all that makes sense. But it's kind of what we do as individuals. I think all of us do that in all of our work. We bring part of who we are especially into the creative world. So it was a good fit for many of those reasons.
To me, that makes sense. And the only follow-up question I would have, and this goes back to, if only Frank had had a flashback, but I wonder, was he even, unhappy or, peripatetic and not thrilled about it before, feeling guilty about what happened with Oceanic 815. I wonder if, like the rest of these people, even going back before his friend ended up piloting that plane, if he was, sort of
he was searching for something.
And maybe the possibility that he was one of those individuals who just always adjusts, in a bigger picture. He may have already dealt with certain things in life, and whatever was to come, he would adjust to. I'm not sure, but I do know, as we touched on the early part of our interview, that I do believe there was a strong guilt factor on the fact that he didn't fly that day,
right,
and needed some answers. So I mean, all great questions, which no one really has the answer to all these questions, even when you talk to the creators and the writers of the show. And again, that was one of the wonderful one of the many wonderful things about the show, that there was such creative freedom to explore all possibilities within this great, wonderfully structured weekly show, that everyone could have all their own subtext that wasn't necessarily related to the other characters. That and for that, it's endless. The stories could be endless. Maybe someday they'll do a revival and pick it back up with Frank and those other folks off the island. You never know. They're rebooting everything, and when you have something good, there's two schools. When something's so good, you leave it alone, never touch it again. But then you have, and that is from the creative side. But then from the audience side, when there's something so good, the audience wants more. And then the question is, and I think I read or heard in an interview that Damon said he and the guys were cool with a reboot, but that they would rather someone else did it. They went the distance as far as they could go, or wanted to go, and that they would be all for someone else picking up the torch and running with it. And I'm of that school, that it's cool if somebody doesn't want to be involved, but I think it's wonderful that they leave the door open for someone else to pick it up and run with it. Whether Jeff, were involved or not, I think it'd be wonderful to see it have a rebirth and move on. And you guys certainly can speak to the audience and know that it would be wonderful, right? God, it played all over the world, and you've got people. If they're still asking the questions, they still want more.
I think I used to be more of a purist, and I would have told you, sooner after it ended, oh, no one should touch it, it's perfect. But now that it's been long enough and we've been enjoying doing this so much, it's like, I'll take some more loss, for sure. Someone wants
and how everything has evolved. We could certainly have answers to these questions 10 years ago, and I may have answered 80% of these questions the same way, but there's that new discovery of the 20% that was thinking, wait a second, maybe this was going on, or this could have gone on, or I could have thought of that, or they could have. So yeah, I'm the door is open. With or without me, I'd love to see it move on.
We talked a bit about the finale, and just wanted to sort of wrap that. What was your, just as a viewer, what was your opinion of it? Because there are so many different opinions, so we always like to ask people, what did you think about that last episode?
Well, we touched on it yesterday, and I said there's 50% of the audience are for and 50 against.
Yeah.
And as I said, I think the people who enjoyed it were ready to let it go. And those who didn't, there's nothing that was going to finalize it for them because they wanted more.
Right.
And I'm of the school of wanting more of this particular show. Yeah. But I did enjoy the ending because I love this sort of the unknown element of where did they go? Where were they? I'm happy with the unknown, or at least content with not knowing exactly what something means. And I think it left it up to a lot of interpretation. Now, maybe with all this discussion of who liked it, who didn't, who was satisfied, who wasn't, did it fulfill the 6 years or didn't it? I wouldn't put it past these guys of having created something like that, of splitting the audience and knowing that they were coming back one day. I don't know. That's an easy way out of to satisfy those who, or at least address those who weren't satisfied with it. But in a short answer, I dug it. I really dug everything that these cats did. I thought they were on their game, and they were ahead of the curve, and they were trying to answer some things that weren't yet ready to be answered creatively and with the audience. So to that, I take my hat off to them. This was something that came out of the gate much stronger, I think, from what I've heard, than they expected, and became this incredibly embraced show worldwide, and that it was bigger than they were almost chasing the storm every week. And for that, I take my hat off, that it was much more than they ever expected. And I think they did great riding the tornado all the way to the end.
Yeah. And it's also, at some point it became less about answering the questions related to the mystery and more about answering the existential questions.
Isn't that something that we all, when we have time, we kind of address what, if we can be comfortable at times with not knowing, that's a pretty powerful thing. We spend all of our days paying the rent, paying the bills, trying to keep ahead of everything. And so we're in this, we're almost like running up a down escalator constantly in life, and needing answers. And I think sometimes there is no answer.
It can be hard for people to
That's
accept.
That's the jazz. From the time we are in school, when the teacher says, the teacher knows the answer and asks the class, who knows, raise your hand. Well, those who know raise their hand, and those who don't are embarrassed and don't raise their hand. From the very beginning, it's quite a struggle, isn't it? So I think that it's okay not to have the answer and not to know the answer. Now, that's in a very esoteric conversation. There are some the simple needs that everyone has to have on a daily basis. Those things have to be answered. wow, cats, did I go too far with that?
This is Lost we're talking about. That's the nature.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. You're you're in Nevis right now on the island, as we mentioned earlier in the conversation. Tell us just a little bit about what you're working on now professionally.
Well, they're two small independent films with a British company, and they've set up they've set up a company here on Nevis, and training a lot of the locals. So we have half professionals who have come in from the UK, and who are actually training the locals to be ADs and PAs, and I mean, the heavy technicians have come in, the department heads, but it's experimental in the sense of in strong support with the Federation of St. Kitts Nevis, but we are on the island of Nevis, which is part of the two island federation, and with the government, they're helping support partial with accommodations and so on, and the UK group is bringing in the finance, and we're doing small feel-good films that are moving out to rom-coms, romantic comedies, and I mean the next one, although it's a bit of a action adventure, but all on small scale. $1.5, $2 million to $3 million budgets, which, I mean, is a large budget to those who don't have it, but compared to the big studio films, they're small. And in answer to your question, it's an experiment that looks like it's working very well, and I'm excited to be part of it.
That's super
That's
cool.
so
That
neat.
aspect of training people locally as well.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think that's fascinating and very exciting. And we're in changing times. I mean, everybody's adjusting to hopefully keep filmmaking and the industry moving forward. So adjusting to all the different areas. And I may have mentioned yesterday when we were talking that I've been very fortunate. I mean, I think my 6th production over this last 14 months in UK and Malta, and here in Nevis, and a couple in the States. But all of these small, independent, inside their own bubble productions, which has been fascinating, really fascinating, self-contained, and everybody's extremely happy to work for all the obvious reasons. But it's been a great experience.
Where can people see the films you're making now? Where will they ultimately be?
Well, they'll be streaming. I mean, these will go to Netflix and Amazon. I mean, of course, it depends where this particular production company makes their distribution deal. But it'll all be on streaming by September. And there's a lot of these films around the world, these small little films that are being made. And even though they're small and the budgets are tight, I mean, it's getting quality people that are coming from all walks of life that have worked on the big and the biggest of the films. So you from the writers to the technicians to the actors, directors, producers, and so on. So everybody's adjusting and squeezing down in hopes that it will start to grow again. But I think it's great that it's given more of a platform to a lot of the indie films and a lot of the workers who wouldn't otherwise get a chance.
So I think that's
Absolutely.
I think that's just about everything we wanted to question wise. We have one more request of you, if you wouldn't mind. Would you mind reading like two lines that we've written?
Oh, you got them
in the voice
great.
of Frank Lapidus?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'm going to shoot him over the chat here. It's just like, it's based on what you would say in the cockpit of a plane pulled from Ajira 316, and we've just altered it a little bit to reflect our podcast.
Do you know that well, of course you know that line, "We're not going to Guam, are we?"
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's your most iconic line.
Yeah. Oh boy. I mean, I've had pilots in airports say that to me.
Seriously?
Really?
Oh, I swear to God. One time when I was in the where was I? I was down in the Western Sahara doing some refugee work, and we had to catch a plane from Dakhla in the Western Sahara to Casablanca. And they had to hold the plane for us as we were coming up from the south. And we got to the airport, and they didn't hold it a long time, but it was actually a commercial flight. And they held it for about 10 minutes or so. And there's about 4 or 5 of us, and we come running on and get on the plane. And the captain's standing there, he goes, "We're not going to Casablanca." And I go, "Oh, am I on the wrong plane?" And he starts cracking up. And he goes, "Lost." I mean, it was so funny. I mean, it was really wild. And and when we got off the plane, I went to him and I said, "You would have got me if you had said, 'We're not going to Casablanca, are we?'" He goes, "Oh, that's right."
I didn't quite get it.
It's too funny.
That's funny.
I got you've done a lot of stuff. I got to think there's no other thing you've done that you're getting stuff like that around the world, right? I mean, that's got to be a unique thing with Lost. I mean, I don't know your whole body of work, so I'm just
Lost,
guessing.
and still get it from Silverado. Still get it from the Lawnmower Man is big. I mean, it's big. And now Alita Battle Angel is a big one. But there's the different genres have their thing. But Lost, definitely. I mean, it's there. But Silverado and Wide Earp, the Westerns, and Lawnmower Man still is strong with the techies. Because there's a lot of people that are heavy geeks that are first went into that whole world because of Lawnmower Man, which they tell me, But Lost is its own baby. It's its own world. Yeah.
I Silverado I'd probably enjoy because I like Westerns, but I had not heard of Lawnmower Man. I got to look that one up. That's news to me.
Sammy, smoke a joint and watch Lawnmower Man, baby. It'll blow a hole in your melon.
Rosie's laughing because she knows that's not my thing, but yeah.
No, but it's the first. It was the first, one of the first virtual reality films. Yeah, it's based on a Stephen King short story, and it's I mean, and all the special effects were an experiment because there weren't those type of virtual reality special effects companies in existence. And when we were doing the film, Pierce Brosnan and I, when we were doing the film, and what you see on the screen, we never saw until we saw the film.
Oh wow!
Because and we had no idea what it was because there was no film that we could look at to get an idea. So when we're looking through goggles, we're just looking into a goggle with cardboard on it. There's nothing on the screen, but yet we're reacting to it. And then when we saw the film, and keep in mind when you see it, it's really primitive, early stages of special effects.
Well, I'll add this to my to-watch list. Thank you so much for your time. This has been wonderful.
And whoever you talk to, please say hello.
He was such a cool guy. I mean, some of his phrasings too, like calling everyone cats, is fun. And I still haven't seen Lawnmower Man, but he said it was gonna blow a hole in my melon. That was not an expression I'd ever heard before.
No.
Jeff, thank you very much for spending some time with us. We will be back next week with LaFleur.
Oh, yes. Oh, I'm so excited to watch LaFleur, and I'm particularly excited that we've got a conversation with Mark Goldman, who directed that episode.
Yeah, it's a great behind-the-scenes look at how one of the most fan-favorite episodes of Lost was made. In the meantime, follow us on social media. We're on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast, Facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast.
As Sammy mentioned earlier, if you'd like to call in with a hot take, we are at 9546-DHARMA.
We also love it if you could rate our podcast, The Hatch, on Apple Podcast or Spotify or wherever you listen, and leave us a review.
Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen, and our cover art is by Danny Roth.
And we will be back next week.
Namaste.